February was a very busy reading month, but I've paid myself some dividends in that I've gotten ahead with my overall Goodreads reading challenge for the year. As of recording on the 1st of March, I am 4 books ahead of schedule. So as you can see, it's been very busy and I'm here to talk to you and recommend to you the books I picked up in February. Let's take a look. Picking up where I left off in my January wrap-up video, I started the month reading After the Forest by Kell Woods. Now you may recall this is a Hansel and Gretel inspired kind of retelling, but it's quite dark fantasy in terms of its nature. It deals with like sort of witchcraft and war and kind of all these kind of darker topics, but set in a story of, you know, we're familiar with kind of the prelude to the story as it's based off the fairy tale Hansel and Gretel. So this was a really interesting read. I was reading this as part of the Cottagecore Fantasy Book Club and I did really enjoy this pick. It was very different to the types of book I pick up normally, but in a good way. And it was nice to have that little bit of a change with a genre that I really know and like. And the fairy tale retelling angle was quite different, but it's something that worked really well within the wider narrative. So this was a very good read. It was nice to push myself out of my comfort zone and try something a little bit different. My second carryover from January, and it shouldn't really be a surprise given the length of the book, was my audiobook listen of Dreams from My Father by Barack Obama. Now again, this is very out there in terms of my reading preferences. I don't really read anything that has any major kind of political leaning. It's not something I enjoy. I just don't love politics in general, to be perfectly honest. I think it's frustrating and there's just loads of backwards and forwards and bickering like children and I can't stand it. But for Barack Obama, I will make an exception. Now this time last year, I listened to his audiobook called Promised Land, which is very much more political than Dreams from My Father. And that was partly to push me out of my comfort zone. I was also reading it for kind of Black History Month. And to be perfectly honest, Barack Obama is the only kind of president or political figure from which I would be interested to read from. I like him as a person. I think he's pretty level-headed, which isn't something we see a lot of anymore. But yeah, so very much exception rather than the rule. But it was nice to push myself out of my comfort zone. So having done that last year with A Promised Land, I felt pretty safe going into Dreams from My Father because I knew what to expect from his writing style. Now to play it safe, I did stick with the format, if you like, in which I read the book, which is I listened to the audio. And I especially like this because it's Barack Obama himself who narrates these. So it really makes it more interesting and it feels way more personal because he is telling you his story himself. So Dreams from My Father, rather than being overly political, is actually about Barack's kind of struggle with like his identity and his race based on his heritage and parentage. So if you're not familiar, Barack didn't really know his father. His father was from Kenya originally, but had come to the US to study, I think, as part of like a program of people from his country to then go and study and then come back and bring back that knowledge to the likes of smaller countries like Kenya. And that ultimately did happen, but obviously somewhere along the way, Barack was born. So he predominantly grew up with his mother's side of the family, but being that his parentage is mixed race, it was very much something he couldn't forget. You know, he was maybe bullied a little bit in school, and his, you know, upbringing was very much a case of he felt like he didn't belong. because it wasn't really kind of the done thing then. Now, he did meet his father once, but he didn't really know him very well. So this book is all about kind of discovering who he is and feeling like he doesn't fit, and maybe maturing into a role where I wouldn't say that doesn't matter quite so much, but it's about his personal growth journey, if you like, as to how he came to terms with that sort of thing. So it was a very interesting listen, very out there listen for me, but it was a good one. I'm glad I've done it, and I can definitely give you a thumbs up. If it's not really your sort of thing normally, don't let that put you off. Please give it a go, because it is a very approachable way to read this kind of book. So definite recommendation from me. Moving on to the books I had set myself for February. I initially kicked off with reading a book for a blog tour obligation that I had on the 12th of February, which was for a book called Grace by A.M. Shine. Now, this was a different book again, in that this book is kind of a horror, but it's set in on like a really remote island based off the west coast of Ireland. I don't think I'm going to try and pronounce it. I will spell it on screen because it's a mouthful and I don't want to butcher it. But it's about a female protagonist who has ties to this island, but she isn't aware of it initially until she gets a phone call from a priest on this island to inform her that a family member has passed away. She ends up traveling to this island in order to find out more about where she came from, and obviously find out about the mother she didn't really know she had. Now, the story spins off a lot from here. It leans heavily into the supernatural and into kind of figures of Irish mythology, which I really liked. I wanted to pick up this book for that reason, and it's because when I read a lot of mythology, you think Greek, you think, you don't necessarily think that close to home. And what actually I really enjoyed about this is that it leaned into elements that are very similar to local mythology, being based on the Isle of Man. There are ties to kind of like local mythological figures, including the god Manannan, who like we describe Manannan's cloak is basically when it gets really foggy, and the idea is like this, he's shielding the island from anything untoward. It's mythology, okay? Lean into it, okay? Just for a minute. But it was interesting that it had these ties that kind of overlapped with local mythology, and that's why I wanted to read this. I wanted to read not necessarily local mythology, but more local in terms of geographic. So it was really interesting. But even without those ties, kind of the supernatural and horror elements of the book were really interesting, really engaging, and I really loved this book. I've reviewed it on my blog. I will give you a link to that here if you want to go and check that out in full. I'll also put it in my description box if you want more detail on that. I will be recording a video with a full review kind of to follow, but if you want to go and check that out now, that's the best place to do that. From there, I went off on a complete tangent and I went from horror to romance, because why not, right? Now, romance isn't something I read a lot of either, but with the recent kind of release of the latest series of Bridgerton on TV, I started watching this and then decided I wanted to give the book a go. Now, I've had mixed feelings about this series so far. I finished the first book, The Duke and I. It was okay. Didn't love it. It was fine. Read it. No problem. Second book, though, I did DNF. I couldn't get on with it. The language really annoyed me. And I got to a point where it was just making me angry. And there's no point in trying to slog through something you're not enjoying. So I actually DNF'd that second book. But I decided to give book 3 a go. And whilst there are still elements of the storyline that I don't love, kind of the romanticizing the rakish behavior of men, but God forbid a woman do the same thing. Like there were things I didn't love, but I listened to this in audio format to make it a little bit easier. I also borrowed it from my library, so I don't feel so salty about paying for it. And I did manage to finish it. It wasn't the quickest listen, but I still managed to listen to it. So it's a big thumbs up for me. I'm proud of myself that I managed to kind of persevere. And actually, I didn't mind this one quite so much. I think because the focus of the storyline for this one around Sophie is about a character who is kind of discriminated against because of her parentage and her birth. I found it a lot easier to sympathise with her than I was doing so for the likes of the sort of more nobility characters that we see throughout Bridgerton. So yeah, this one actually kind of went down better than I thought it was going to. So yeah, personal win. But what this was also great for is that it actually inadvertently gave me a win on my Goodreads 2026 reading challenge. There was a prompt that I wasn't sure what it meant. The hint on it was your book personality awaits. And I had no idea what this was. But actually it was to basically read a book recommended to you by Goodreads. And because I've read earlier books in this series, I can only guess this book was on that list. So I actually got an accidental win. So I will take that. I am not complaining. Moving on to the books I've been reading towards book clubs this month, I initially picked up Throne of Glass by Sarah J Maas, and I am actually still reading this book. I managed to get about a quarter of the way through it before I had to put it down to prioritise the likes of Grace and other reading obligations, and it's one I'm just getting back to now. Now, I have to hold my hands up here and say I'm actually pleasantly surprised that I'm getting on with this book as well as I thought. I fully admit I've gone into this series with a bit of a preconception that I'm not going to like it. And it's because of the romance connotations and, like, I think the likes of the ACOTAR series are lighter, is what I've been told. Obviously a bit more of a romancy kind of theme. But because so far Throne of Glass is very kind of fantasy based, actually it's doing pretty well. Yes, there are elements where I think I can see there's going to be a romance element that comes in later, but it's not dominating the rest of the narrative, so it's not putting me off, or sort of taking over any world building or the actual elements of the book that I'm going to enjoy. So, and one thing is I'm actually curious to kind of discover the backstory of Selena. There's obviously something that's happened to, make her start from where she did in this first book, and I believe that's addressed later. I'm not sure which book, but I have been assured it's addressed later. So I'm looking forward to, seeing where her background has maybe shaped the character she is today. So there's definitely elements I'm really excited about this book to read, and it's going down better than I thought. So maybe I'm a bit more of a diverse reader than I gave myself props for. But either way, I'm just happy to lean into the fact that it's winning right now. It is my current read, and so far things are going well. Next on the list is a book I read very quickly, and it was only 100 pages. It was a play, so it's quite easy to do. And that is called Blues for an Alabama Sky. Now, I picked this up for our book club at work. I picked a romancy type theme, which is also why I was reading Throne of Glass. So I had that to talk about in the club. But also Blues for an Alabama Sky is about a young woman she's like a showgirl type character. She sings in Harlem in New York. It's set in kind of Depression era America. So she ends up losing her job, and she almost ends up romanticizing a character who, helps her home. She thinks he's going to be her savior and she's not going to struggle in life anymore. But actually, fundamentally, they had some very different values, and things happen that causes this conflict between them and really kind of shatters apart this dream that they could be a really good couple. So it was interesting to read from a kind of Black heritage perspective as well, because the characters are from that kind of background. But also there is this romance element that worked towards the book club. Again, didn't overface the whole narrative, and it challenges things in terms of, you know, like religion and homosexuality, and the main character, like I think one of her flatmates is looking to support or build a community centre to help women who are seeking abortions if they get pregnant accidentally, and really just generally provide better healthcare for women. So it's not a light book in a way. It talks about these topics, but it's not overfacing either. So it was a really nice balance, and obviously being 100 pages, not too heavy, so that worked really well. It was very different. I haven't read a play before I've obviously read plays before because I used to do a lot of theatre stuff, but I've not read a play to read it like a book, if you know what I mean. So that was a bit different, and actually I enjoyed the format change, so that worked really well for me as well. Now we're getting down to our final 2 reads of the month, and the first of those to feature is The Three Witches by Eleanor Collins. Now this book is particularly kind of topical at the moment because I just published my review of this book on my blog earlier today. I will also link that one down in the description, and again there will be a video that follows if you prefer your reviews in video format. But this was a really interesting historical fiction novel that tries to kind of turn the stereotypical kind of witch narrative on its head. So there are 2 timelines in this book, and kind of the modern day timeline is a young woman called Ruthie who is an actor, and she gets involved in a documentary about Macbeth and the characterization or the kind of existence of witches in that kind of timeline. So it's a historical based documentary they're filming with these kind of little acting snips that go in to kind of feed in, and Ruthie is one of these witches. Now we have a second timeline that goes back 1,000 years, and it's about 3 sisters who grow up in this small community. Their mother is the local healer, she's well trusted, and they grow up learning her kind of knowledge. Now when she passes, the youngest of the girls, Isabel, who I suppose resonates most with her mum, and there is an explanation in this book why, and the power of 3s and stuff like that, but she ends up taking this mantle. Now things don't end well for Isabel, as I'm sure you can imagine, with the kind of witchcraft theme going in here. And what happens is these 2 timelines come together, and we roll through these stories where they're trying to tell the stories of these witches, but actually there's a spectre or kind of figure in the modern day timeline that Ruthie is able to interact with, that is maybe challenging the traditional narrative that is being given to this young woman, or being ascribed to this young woman in history sort of thing. So it's about challenging the idea that she was evil and was out to hurt people and cause disruption. Actually, it's about giving these women their voice back and highlighting really that they were normal people. They often were doctors, nurses, midwives. You know, they were there looking after their community, and unfortunately some negative dissenting male voices decided that they didn't like what these women were doing, whether that's for personal reasons or whatever, and then that unfortunately plays out and has consequences. So this is a really interesting book in terms of setting that kind of narrative straight, but it's also very personal in that we really get to invest in the lives of the 3 sisters and what happens to them. So this was a really, really exciting historical fiction read, and it was nice that it tried to stay as true kind of to history as it could. So that's a big win for me. Finally, I finished the last little bit of an audiobook today, so I'm counting it in my February progress because I'm not going to count 20 minutes or so, and that is my listen of Dear Debbie by Frida McFadden. Now, you may recall I wanted to read this book as a new release to kind of give you more topical reviews rather than just doing my own thing, And obviously Frida McFadden is a pretty big name now. She is an author I have enjoyed previously in reading her Housemaid series. So I wanted to pick up this latest one so I could give you this topical content, and it is a fantastic book, by the way. Not that there was ever really any doubt. But it also means then I can now go and read her backlist. Dear Debbie is about a protagonist who writes a Dear Debbie column. Her name is Debbie, obviously. You know, she's like an agony aunt type character. And there's definitely more to her than kind of meets the eye, and I'm not going to spoil absolutely anything for you. But her history comes out over the course of this book. She is a very intelligent woman, although she dumbs herself down. And a lot of things happen. And there is a really interesting kind of twist at the end that I wasn't expecting. I should have, because Frida McFadden, but I didn't anticipate what that was until it came about. So it was a really interesting kind of mystery thriller. Not that I should have expected anything less. But definitely, if this is your bag and you like a really easy to read or listen from this genre, then Dear Debbie is perfect for you. So definitely go read that one. So I have a total of 7 finishes in this February wrap up and 1 carryover into my monthly TBR for March. I have recorded that TBR for March today, and I really hope you can go and check that out in a couple of days. I will be posting this to my channel here, so hopefully if you're looking for some inspiration on what to read next, especially if you're looking to finish the Goodreads Winter Challenge this month along with me, there are some recommendations here for some of the prompts, and I'll share with you what I'm going to be reading towards those. I do hope you can check that out. If you've read any of the books I've featured in today's video, I would love to hear from you and hear what you thought on these books. I'm always up for a bookish chat, and if you've got any recommendations of books based on what I've read and enjoyed this month, I'm also really keen to hear those. If you want to see what's coming up on my Goodreads Winter Challenge in the meantime, you can go and check out that video here. Now, there is one slight change I'm having to make to this kind of collection of books I've chosen, but I'll be spelling all that out in my TBR video in a couple of days. I hope you've enjoyed today's video and maybe taken some inspiration for your next read. Until next time, bye for now.